And welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast. And today is a first for us. And it just seems there are many, many firsts these days. We had our first interview with Brady Jequin a few weeks ago. We reviewed our first show with Secret Invasion. And we recently reviewed our first indie film with our very first guest, Brady Jequin. So we're just keeping all these firsts rolling along with a review of a popular Bollywood movie, RRR. Um, so let's go ahead and get started into this. Now, I will admit, this was a Bollywood movie I never thought I would see. And it's not that I don't like Bollywood movies because I've seen Bollywood movies before, but this particular one kind of I don't know. It never really stuck out in my mind, and I never really would have seen it until unless you've came in and said, Luca, we're going to review this film. Please watch it so we can talk about it. Um, I just want to ask, what is it about this particular movie that stood out to you that made you decide, yes, we're going to review this on our next episode?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think it deals with the fact that not I'm not really, or I can't really think of a time I saw a Bollywood movie. I might have seen bits and pieces of stuff, but I personally don't feel like I've ever really seen it. And I think that with a lot of what's out there now, right, I feel like there's really an oversaturation of, kind of like superhero stuff. And I feel like that's just so much a part of it that I really wanted to try to gauge in something different. And I think that's what kind of got me into looking at this stuff because it got a ton of notoriety, right? I think everyone was talking about RRR for a while. So, I was like, well, you know what? I'll give it a shot. And, even though it is a 3 hour long movie, so it's definitely a little bit longer than I'm sure like most audience goers tend to, kind of look for. I was like, you know what? Let's give it a shot. Let me take a look at it. And, that's what really gravitated toward that's what really gravitated me towards it was just the fact that it was something different, right? It was something new for the palette, and I can at least say for myself, I am very glad I watched it.
Yeah, I mean, the only other Bollywood movie I've seen in full was Bajirao Mastani, and that was set in like 18th century India, so before the British came and turned it into a colony. But what I watched it, I was like, huh, this is over the top, but it works. Like I'm actually enjoying watching this. Um, Now, for those of y'all who haven't seen the movie, and if you haven't, then stop this video, go watch it. It's 3 hours long, like Lee said, and once you've watched it, come back and resume listening to this podcast. But basically, this is it's a bromance set during the 1920s during the British Raj, and basically it's about two guys who are essentially trying to accomplish the same goal, but they're doing it in very different ways because Beam is trying to. For Beam, it's a very personal mission. He's trying to save Molly, and for Raju, he's trying to fulfill a promise he made to his dead father. So I just want to start off. What did you think about the two characters, Beam and Raju?
I thought that they were great. I mean, it's something where I would say the story's not like super, super in depth, right? You said it very well. It is just kind of, essentially, it's some form of like a revenge rescue type of story where both the characters are there. But I like the fact that the characters kind of go through a ton in order to get that. So you have Beam, who is, trying to save a girl that was kidnapped from his village. And like you pointed out, Raju is trying to, get a whole bunch of guns delivered to his village where he made a promise to his dad that was killed by the British. And, I think the both the actors just do such a great job of kind of creating this like really strong friendship. Like it's just crazy to think about how we kind of see it, and I like how you describe it. It is a bromance, right? Like it's just two guys that kind of befriend each other. They clearly have, I mean, not superpowers, obviously, but they're clearly
They're freaking ripped. Like, seriously, like,
Yeah,
what the
they're
hell?
very different, right? Like it's kind of like it's imagining like kind of like talk about like old Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, right? Like we know Arnold's like a human being and like he probably can't do some of the things that he does, even though he's like obviously super strong. And I feel like this kind of takes it a step further. It's like, you know what? Like reality is maybe Arnold is so tough that he could do some of these outrageous things, and they kind of amplify that up to 10. So I think the character interactions were really good, and I like how you're kind of slowly fed the story, especially with Raju, right? We don't
Yeah.
really see a whole lot about it at the beginning. It isn't until much later on where we kind of get more about it. So I think the way that they do the storytelling really enhances the story, because obviously if you know that they both have these competing interests, it's not as interesting. The fact that we kind of see everything happen with Beam and then it goes over to Raju where we kind of get his backstory, it starts to make sense what his actions are. And I
Yeah.
think that just goes to show how good storytelling can make a huge difference in this happening, because I think if you see it both happen simultaneously, I don't think I would get as much joy out of it. Whereas I think the way that they did it, it gave me the most enjoyment with it, because you see why, you know, Beam is doing this and you start to really despise Raju. And let's say it's like, damn, like he's betraying a friend, but, you know, he wants to do this. And then you see why he's doing it. It's like, oh, damn, this puts it in a totally different light. And that's just because they decided to kind of do the story the way that they did it.
Because I mean, like the first 2 hours, I want to say the first 2 hours of the movie, you're definitely rooting for Beam, and you were like, "Wow, Raju, you're just a collaborator. You're just sucking up to the British." And then
Yeah.
then you come to find out, oh, he's doing it because he's trying to gain their trust, so they can put him in charge of transporting the weapons, so then he can fulfill that promise to his dad. But but what I just find so interesting is the fact that these guys are just, like you said, they're just accomplishing, these feats that you would see in in movies from the 1980s, like that. Like remember the very beginning where all those people are protesting outside of the police station, and Raju just like leaps. Oh, he does a Captain America leap, basically.
Yeah.
He leaps over them and he just starts wailing on on all these guys, and you're like, there's no way in hell that one man is going to stand up to that entire crowd. But like he's just, and now he's got his stick too. He's got a freaking stick, and yeah, he's just like wailing and just like beating the absolute shit out of everybody there. I
He
mean,
was like a damn wrecking ball. Like he just plows through everybody like nothing.
I mean, I mean, I don't even know. I don't even know. Like, if I want to ask, what did you think about it? Because it's like because a part of me is like, I'm a bit incredulous, but at the same time, I'm like, that's pretty freaking impressive.
Yeah, I mean it's true, and it really does have a very basic setup, right? So it's like literally the first scene, right? We see Molly get captured, right? So that's how it
Yeah.
all started. So you see her get captured. We obviously know the British are evil, right? So they hammer that point home very well at the beginning and certainly throughout the movie.
Thanks to the
Then,
thanks
like you
to
said,
the talents of the late Ray Stevenson, I might add.
yes, yep, Ray Stevenson, and actually the female, his wife, is Elsa from Indiana Jones.
Yeah, that's right. You were telling me about that. Yeah, her face looks
Yes,
really
yep.
different
So
too.
yes, of course, and like I said, I mean, granted, I'm sure she's been in other things, but I obviously know her very well from that. But reality is that is 40 years old now, right? 30, 40 years old at this stage. So, I mean, it's things are going to change. But yeah, like we see kind of the kidnapping, and then we meet Raju, right? And like I said, he's just sitting there, and you see, like, I mean, there has to be like what, thousands of people outside of this place, and
Yeah.
like this little rinky-dink compound, it has to have like what, like 12, maybe 20 British soldiers, right?
It kind of felt like Zulu almost. Remember?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's an excellent analogy, right? It really did feel like that, and it is pretty much geared for something like that. And he's like, you see this, kind of like head officer is like, oh, I want you to arrest that guy. And like, as I'm watching this, I'm like, no one's going to do that. Like, look at that shit out there. And then you just see this guy, and I didn't know what to expect going into this, right? So when you see him just jump on these barrels and go over that gate, my jaw just dropped. I was just like, what the hell am I watching? And you just watch it, and it's just totally crazy, right? He's just sitting there, he's beating people up, he's pushing people off, and, he finds this guy, and eventually,
he brings
after
him in,
lots of fighting, and lots of just like him, he's a one-man army out there. Like, he's taking on, like, hundreds of people, and he's just, like, pushing them all away. And it just kind of creates this very obvious thing that, he's not a superhero, but like clearly he has, he's a very strong and capable character, right? And I think that's just something that when I'm watching it, it is one of those things where I always like to talk about how you just have to kind of turn your brain off, right? Like, this is something where, obviously it's not meant to be taken like, in a very serious context. It's the story that's most important. So you kind of create that, and then we get to meet Bheem right afterwards, and his is pretty much like he's sitting there fighting a tiger, right? And it's just like kind of wild how this is kind of what we see, where he's like sitting here and like he's getting clawed by the tiger, and it's just like, damn, like this is a totally badass way to introduce the characters. And very quickly you kind of see it's, we get the conflict with the girl being kidnapped. We meet Bheem. We meet Raju, and then we meet Bheem, and that's really how it starts. And that's like the first 45 minutes of the movie. Like, there's a lot that's put on that introduction and kind of getting you used to not only understanding the conflict that's happening, but understanding the characters. And like I said, a very interesting way that they did it, and I think it definitely sets up for these guys being very physically capable of doing anything.
Now, obviously, Raju's put on the he's put on the case to find, the character that we know as Bheem, and if he finds him, he gets that big promotion that he's looking for. But when they show the intro, it just shows them, just having bromance moments, just sharing a scooter ride, just walking down the street, jumping off a bridge, and grabbing each other's hands and all that stuff.
Yeah, so cool, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean,
crazy.
I mean, the thing that made me scratch my head a little bit was, did either one of them know like who the other one was? Because you kind of get the feeling like they meet each other and they're like, oh, well, you're a cool guy, yeah, you're super jacked, and they have that. It's kind of like that moment in Predator where Carl Weathers and Arnold Schwarzenegger, they meet up and they just like grab each other's hands, like, yeah, how's it going, buddy?
Yes.
You my bitch, all that stuff. But at the same time, I was wondering, I mean, did Bheem kind of know that Raju was with the police? Because he must have known. It wasn't like, it came as a total surprise to him, because I'm sure Raju had no idea who Bheem was.
Well, I mean, I think they kind of set that up, at least in my opinion, right? I feel like they kind of set up that they don't really know much. So Raju is out there trying to catch this guardian of the village, but they go out of their way to say, like, we don't even know what he looks like. So yeah, I think they make it very obvious.
Yeah, but I mean, he's passing out those leaflets with the face on it, and it kind of looks like Bheem. I mean, God, this sounds racist saying that, but it kind of looks like him. So,
well, I think so. So yeah, so it is like it is. There are some things, like, obviously what they do is very much superhuman, right? Like, they have this sequence where he's on a horse, Raju's on a horse, Bheem's on the motorcycle, and they like have the ropes. One of them grabs the flag. One of them is like, they're both swinging. Bheem grabs the kid and throws him over, and Raju throws him the flag so he can protect himself. And then they have that kind of connection in the middle. So, I mean, yeah, I would say Bheem is probably less likely to know Raju is an officer. Raju probably has at least some inkling about it, but there's not a whole lot to go off of. I do see what you're saying with it. Like you are looking for someone that's really, really tough, and you kind of run into this guy that literally is jumping off bridges with you. And there probably is a little bit of it, but I don't think it didn't suspend my disbelief long enough that it would take time for them to understand the incident. It is kind of weird that, kind of later on where Raju is kind of like passing out like showing people the flyer, like you said, of his friend that they kind of ran into. And there's like the scene on the bike where it's like, oh, well, why did you never show me yet? He's like, oh, I guess I don't know why. And that seems kind of weird. It's a little bit hokey.
Yeah,
right?
that's what I don't get, because
clearly-
I'm like, you guys hang around each other a lot. I would think at some point that will come up in conversation and be like, hey, I'm looking for this guy. Have you seen him? And he like holds up the picture of him.
Yes. Yeah, no, I totally agree. It is a little bit hokey, right? Because the picture is the friend of Bheem's, or I think family. I don't remember if they're friends or family. But
I think it might have been family.
Yeah, I think I remember them saying maybe cousins.
Yeah.
But then like also like the girl refers to him as a brother, and I don't know, like I'm not sure, but yeah, they're most likely family. I think cousins. Where Raju kind of is he meets the cousin of Bheem, and that's what he has a picture of, that he's trying to find this cousin of Bheem to get to Bheem. And when they have this scene that would have obviously sparked a lot of tension in it, it's just kind of something where these guys are like superhumans, but then Raj just kind of incidentally just drops this in a puddle of mud and ruins the image. And it's like crazy because this guy is like literally like jumping on barrels and flying through the air, and they have all this great coordination, and then it's like this gust of wind takes this piece of paper from me, and it destroys the evidence that would have definitely made this story go a lot quicker, right? There would have been a very quick confrontation. So there are definitely aspects of it where you have to suspend your disbelief, because they do just kind of play it as almost like kind of like a dumb joke, and I think it kind of is. But yeah, it is kind of silly to think about that. Really, they probably should have found out each other's identities a little bit quicker.
I mean, they eventually find out because remember, Raju, he's interrogating that one guy, and towards the end he goes to cut his restraint, and he throws a snake at him and he gets bitten, and he's like, there's no cure for it. The British don't have a cure at all. Only our people know the cure for it. And then and then he goes stumbling in the streets. Bheem finds him and administers the cure. And then what I think is a bit foolish, in my opinion, is the fact that he discloses to Raju and says, "Oh, by the way, we're gonna hatch the scheme. We're gonna break into Governor Scott's palace tonight, and I'm telling you this, but you're lying in bed, you're recovering. There's nothing you can do. So, see ya." I just thought that was a bit of a slip up on Bheem's part. I'm just saying.
Sure, yeah, and I think that's a good point. And it's interesting, you put it in a way that I didn't think about in context, but that is a good point. Because on the way I view it, right, I look at it like, to me, they have this really strong bond, right, where I feel like they are brothers, right? I mean, they have a full trust in themselves, like they've been supporting each other. And I think that was just a show, for at least from Bean's point of view, right? It was a show of confidence in his friend. To your point, right, we could look at it in a different light, like Bheem should really not be disclosing this to anybody. But I think that kind of, at least for me, it sticks with the character, because I felt like Bheem was a lot more of an emotionally driven character.
He's more trusting.
That's how I kind of, yes, exactly, right? I felt like, he's kind of, he exists in a world, or like where he is, he doesn't have to worry about all this. Whereas Raju, like, he's used to just keeping secrets, like, because that's what he's been doing for years, right? I think it was almost 15 years, right? I think that's how long they said that he was gone. So, I mean, this is a guy that for 15 years has been, keeping his true identity under wraps. And for him, it's like anything else. But for Bheem, he's not used to having a need to do that. So I think it kind of works well with their characters, where Bheem is a lot more trusting, whereas Raju, he clearly is not willing to risk anything because, I mean, he's been doing it for most of his life, right? He's been holding the secret behind for so long that I think when he eventually kind of goes down the path that he goes down, I think it shows how much growth he has as a character because he's been willing to do this for 15 years, but he's not ultimately willing to sacrifice Beam's life. Of course, he's willing to sacrifice a lot of other things, but he's not willing to watch him die.
But I mean, to your point, I mean, during that time, he's kind of lost sight of the humanity because he's so engaged with accomplishing his goal and trying to like play the part. He's kind of lost a bit of himself in the process. So
yeah.
So when Bheem, so when Bheem gets condemned and he's got to flog him, that's kind of the eye opener right there, because when Bheem starts singing the song and everybody starts joining in, it's like, holy shit, like that's the weapon. It's not guns. It's getting the people riled up and inspired and on side.
Yeah, and Raju even notices that too, right? So he picks up on the fact that that's truly what it is. And yeah, absolutely. And I think this is how good storytelling works, because at that stage, like when you're at that point, you're like, oh my God, this guy Raju's a real asshole. Like we're really built up to want to like this person. And, we really start to despise him, especially through that process. And it isn't until kind of afterwards where we start to get more about his backstory. We start to understand more about where he comes from. So, but yeah, I think for a while there, like you're very much on Team Bheem, where it's just like, this guy Raju, he's a real asshole. Like he's sitting there, he's
I mean, he's a freaking collaborator, dude. I mean, like from an Indian standpoint,
absolutely, yeah.
From an Indian standpoint, you're like, why the hell would I root for this guy? He's basically beating the crap out of his own countrymen for the British, Oh
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they really, really gear him to be the villain, and I think that's what makes that change so strong from one way of looking up to the next, that you get so much sympathy for him afterwards. It's just like, wow, like it totally does a 180 on how you kind of view that character.
So I do want to ask you this because for me it kind of took some adjustment. How did you feel? How did your feelings for Raju change once you saw his backstory about his dad, having to witness the British, basically club a guy to death, and then deciding to start his own insurrection, and then they getting attacked by the British, and then obviously him entering the service to kind of work from the inside. Did it change your perception of Raju like right away, or was it one of those things where you kind of had to let the story play out a little bit further before you kind of started to think, maybe he's not that bad after all? I can sort of understand where he's coming from now.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think that's where things started to turn. But I think deep in my mind, right, even though what we saw was terrible and I could sympathize with the character, it still bothered me with what we were seeing, right? I don't think it was until he decided he was going to rescue Bheem that I kind of was like, okay, now I feel better about this character. Because before, it's like, yeah, it's a tragic story, right? And it's really two characters trying to accomplish the same thing, right? They're trying to bring down this contingent of British that's there, right? That's their ultimate goal for both of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, seeing the backstory, yeah, that sucks, right? Like he witnessed, his mom died, witnessed, his brother died. And then, you kind of, he's sitting there with his dad, and he's sitting there trying to protect his dad. And then, I mean, what an impactful thing. His dad's out there with a bomb vest on, and Raju has to kill his own dad. Like, I mean, I couldn't imagine being a young kid. I mean, the kid how old do you think he was in that scene? He couldn't be more than like, I don't know, like what, like, do you recall how old he was? I don't know if they mentioned it.
I mean, I mean the fact that he was, he was able to handle that gun, I'd probably say he's probably like 12 or 13 ish. I would say.
Sure, right. I would say that was probably the older end of the spectrum on what I would guess on too, right? So, but yeah, like, I mean, this is like a really young kid that has, I mean, I couldn't imagine how much that would shape you if it's like, yep, I just watched all my family die, and I had to kill my own father in order to protect the village, right? Like, to me, that just creates such a interesting backstory for the character, and it really makes you be on Raju's side. But even with that being said, if he didn't save Beam, or if he allowed something worse to happen to Beam, I don't even think that backstory would have saved him, because really we're more invested in their friendship than we are their individual character stories.
Because I mean, that's in the
I
past,
think yes.
Yeah.
Right, yes. And from a movie going standpoint, right, we spent the most time seeing their friendship. So us getting that information, while it's impactful, I think it doesn't resonate with us because we've spent an hour and a half watching these two guys get this close bond and become close friends. Having kind of this backstory helps fill in some holes, but I don't think it does enough to justify, what's happening. So I think it's kind of like, interesting how Raju comes to that realization that this isn't worth it to have Beam get killed. As much as I want to do this for my dad, I feel like I would lose too much of my humanity to not go through with this, which is why, he ultimately, goes, takes Molly, with him, and, ends up protecting her through the whole thing. And I think even more interesting was, I really like how they did the sequence, the chase sequence, right?
Yeah.
Because, eventually Molly gets to Beam, and you see Raju pointing a gun at her. We as an audience know that he's pointing the gun at
the sniper,
another soldier.
Yeah.
But he doesn't know that. Beam doesn't know that, right? So I think they really sell that really well, that, hey, this girl is having this happen to her, and, Beam still leaves that area under the impression that Raju was still a terrible person. So I think they set that up really well, because I think it would have been hard for me to buy that, but I think they filmed it in a way where it's like, okay, I can understand from Beam's standpoint that Raju just, simply killed an officer unbeknownst to him, and he was still able to beat Raju and kind of make his escape.
Yeah, and for me, when he made that move, I was like, all right, maybe he's starting to see the light now. Maybe he's starting to know that there's another way about it. So, so what I really liked was was that reversal where, Raju first of all, he goes out of his way to make sure that Molly and Beam escape, and then a few scenes later, Beam meets with Sita, and he comes to find out, oh shit, you're the girl. So you're the girl that Raju's been talking about. So you're with Raj, and you're trying to find out what happened to Raju. Oh my God, what have I done? And then then he mounts a rescue to go and rescue Raju. And I thought that's such a perfect juxtaposition. I mean, they couldn't have done it better, because I mean, that's bromance at its essence. I got your back. Now I got your back. Obviously they had to go through a few scenes where they figured out, oh, it was all a huge misunderstanding. But I thought that was just so perfectly positioned, like the two just paralleling each other.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They did a fantastic job with that. And I think, as I said, it is pretty serendipitous that they would run into each other, Beam and Sita. But even with that, right, it helps tell the story, right? And I think that's where we get more of that story. And you can just see, and like I said, I think, both of the lead actors do such a great job, but you can really feel how Beam feels in that situation. Like, the actor just totally sells it with his facial expression, like how much he realizes, he looked at the situation. And granted, Raju did whip him, right? He did terrible things to him, so I don't want to underplay that at all, because I do think the film kind of does that pretty quickly. But I do like how Beam comes to that realization, like, oh damn, like, if I was in a similar situation where, I've been kind of in this position for, 15 years, probably slowly killing my humanity, doing something that I don't want to do, but knowing it's for the greater good of myself, what would I feel like and what would I do? And I think Beam kind of comes to the same realization, the audience, that I mean, that would be a lot for Raju to overlook, right? I'm sure he's had plenty of friends and plenty of people he's met, and he was willing to sacrifice it all for one guy, Beam, who he barely knew, right? Like, some cool dance sequences, right? Like, obviously some of that stuff in true Bollywood fashion, but something where reality is he's just like one guy in the life of Raju. And Beam just kind of, you see the expression of like, oh my God, like this guy has been through so much. Like, I know I've been doing this with, Molly to kind of bring her back home, but this guy has been enduring this for decades, right? Like that's his reality. And I think, it just makes that moment so much better where you have Beam running and getting to the barracks, and then kind of meeting together again, and like, no good way to show a bond than you have a guy on your shoulders and you're running around with them to show two friends meeting again and getting that connection again. So not only do we see that in the idea that they're finally back together again, but really they're like locked in, for no better term. They're locked in, and we kind of see that friendship kind of continue, and it's back to what we as an audience want to see.
I kind of get the feeling that the filmmakers of this movie, they watched a lot of 80s movies, because that sequence in the jungle was very much like Rambo.
Oh yes.
I mean, seriously, that I got First Blood vibes all over it, and then that scene where Beam pops out of the pond with the spear, that was clearly what was it, Rambo 4, where he's in Afghanistan. That's I was just getting like major vibes from them. I'm like, these guys clearly appreciate 80s action movie, and for that I applaud them. Like, well done, sir.
Yeah,
well
I mean,
done.
even like when we meet Beam at the beginning, right? Like when he's sitting there, and he's like sitting there, like he's shirtless and everything, and he's trying to be like he's like flexing and everything in the jungle, and it's just like, I could easily imagine like that's something like a Predator, where you got Arnold like sitting there when they're like hoisting stuff and they're trying to connect things. Like it's just kind of like a perfect setup. And I mean, obviously that's not unique to 80s action movies, but for sure it definitely gave me some thoughts about that as I was watching it, because it's very clear that there is at least a little bit of a send-off inspiration, or however you want to describe it, that we're seeing in those sequences.
So I did want to talk about some of those dance sequences, because obviously when you watch a Bollywood movie, that's par for the course. The big one I'm thinking of was when Beam is invited to that party by Jenny, and that I forget who the guy's name is, but basically he kicks Beam down, and then Raju like grabs the drum set and starts drumming.
Nameless British ass face number 4. We could call him that, because that's pretty much all they are. So
yeah, we'll call him limey asshole. But basically Raju commandeers the drum set, and he just starts wailing on it, and all of a sudden they just do that dance. I'm like, you people have been in India and you don't know about this dance? Oh, you are in for a treat. I was genuinely like clapping along and just bobbing my head, to that beat, because it was so good. And and to their credit, like the actors were just on point, because I can't imagine it being very, very easy. I mean, obviously no dance sequence is going to be easy, but what I feel like with Bollywood films, it's like on an entirely another level. Like, what did you think about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like the choreography that most go into that is staggering. To get everything right, to get the sequences right, like there must be so much that goes into it. And it was kind of funny because, in Bollywood, I kind of knew to expect it, right? Like, even though I've not seen a ton of those, movies, I kind of know that dance to be part of it. So when it started to happen in my mind, I was kind of like, I don't know how I'm going to feel about this, because we know at least stuff that's done in Hollywood now, right? We don't see a whole lot of dancing, unless that's really like a part of it, like West Side Story, right? Like where that's integral to the storytelling process, but we don't really see a whole lot of dancing normally. Definitely not at the level we see in this movie. So like when I was approaching it, I was just like, well, let's see how it goes. It just might be something that I just have to kind of accept that's a part of how a Bollywood movie is going to be. And then when it happens, I'm like, oh, holy crap, this is fantastic. Like, that song absolutely slaps. Like, I could see myself playing that in a car and just being like totally enthralled with it. So yeah, it is something where I'm kind of going into it with this idea that, this is going to be whatever. I'm going to, watch it, and it's just going to kind of be like, something goofy that you're going to see, and you're just going to kind of accept it. And then I actually watched it. I was like, oh, damn, I'm totally blown away, because it's just something we don't see nowadays. Like, I mean, there are older movies that was very common, right? Like, Singing in the Rain. There's a lot of movies where dancing was very common in these movies, but it's not something that we've seen for a very long time. So I think it was just kind of a chain, and be able to see that change and seeing the whole dance sequence. It was incredible. I mean, the sets, the design. I mean, I don't normally talk about that type of stuff, but it's hard not to notice how grand everything is with that sequence. And it was just a totally fun, 5-minute song that I was just totally engaged in the whole way from beginning to end.
I mean, it's very infectious because once it's kind of like, I kind of like to equate it with Cowboy Bebop, because Cowboy Bebop is that gateway show. Like, if you've seen that, then you're going to start watching more and more anime. Like, if you watch one Bollywood dance sequence, that's going to get you, further and further down the rabbit hole until you're just watching every Bollywood movie you can get your hands on. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I could easily see that, because like it stuck out to me, because I'm kind of going into it like, this is going to be just something I have to accept it's going to be in the movie, and it's just probably something where I'm just not going to get any interest in. But man, was I wrong. And I'm always glad to be wrong in situations like that, because it totally blew me away. I was like, oh, damn, this was incredible. This was tons of fun to watch. So I was very excited for that. And I definitely will say that it definitely gives me a lot more appreciation to, I'm sure, the amount of work that these actors have to go through, because it could not have been easy to go through that whole dance sequence. It could not have been. So huge props to them for everything they had to learn in order to do that and execute that in the way that they did.
Well, I was going to say, because usually when we think of dance sequence, before I ever watched a Bollywood movie, I thought, oh, they're just gonna have a random dance sequence that's gonna have no attachment to the story. They're just gonna break out in song and dance for no reason, But then, from the 2 or 3 Bollywood movies I've seen now, it's like, oh, these dance sequences are actually appropriate to the story. They're not just doing it, on the fly. They're doing it like as part of the overall storyline, which I definitely, found surprising. But to your point, I'm always happy to be proven wrong in that aspect. So I do want to shift gears a little bit, because we have been talking about the protagonists for quite a while. How did you feel about Ray Stevenson as Governor Scott and the British overall?
Yeah, I mean, I would say from a storytelling perspective, they were extremely one note, to almost the part where they were comically evil, right? Like, these are not normal evil people. Like, these are like super villain levels of evilness. I still like the scene where Bheem is getting, whipped, right? And the wife, right, like, just takes a random like whip that has spikes on it. Yeah. She just pulls it out. Like, it's just like, yep, here we go. I just, pull this out my ass. Here's this, whip that I just happen to have on hand for these, floggings in a square. And I'm like, wow, that is just so over the top evil. I mean, and it all starts from the beginning, right? Like, literally, she's just like, I'm going to give these like 2 like beat up looking coins. Like, I don't know how much that's worth. I mean, I'm sure next to nothing. And Lily just kidnap a girl. I'm just like, well, holy shit, if that doesn't set the tone for the movie, I don't know what does. So, I mean, kidnaps the girl, and I kind of like how Ray Stevenson definitely plays up that role extremely well, as being kind of that very much despised British character.
I mean, he's very pompous.
He's it up to 10.
Yeah, he's very pompous.
Oh, yeah.
In that scene. Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. Like, I thought he did a phenomenal job in that role as Governor Scott, but at the same time, I just kept thinking he really enjoys telling people how much a bullet costs. Like,
Yes.
like he's got that memorized like down to a T. Like, is this one of those? Because I count there are probably like three scenes where he goes over and tells a soldier, do you know how much that bullet costs? It was first manufactured in England, and then it had to be transported by this all the way by sea to to India, where it finds its way into your gun. So please use another method, because a bullet is a waste on these natives. And I'm like, because at one point I'm like, okay, so that's pretty brutal. He's telling them to just treat these people like animals and beat the living crap out of them. But at the same time, I'm like, he's very economical, isn't he? Because he seems very keen to whip that line out at every occasion.
Yeah, it is very odd. I totally agree with you. Like, it is kind of weird. I mean, and it does play a certain aspect to it, right? Because we see, kind of Raju at the beginning. He sees this kind of sequence where, they have this, guy tied up, and the guy's about to shoot him. And then Ray Stevens' character shows up and, goes through his little elevator pitch about how much the bullet is. And I mean, it plays up quite a bit, right? Because even Raju's father, he talks about, oh, I'm sorry, I'm misremembering that. It's Raju's father that initially sees the scene with Ray Stevenson and then reiterates that to Raju when he's young. So, but yeah, so kind of interesting how that kind of all ties back, because, Ray Stevenson talks about it a lot, and, Raju actually knows this really well because his father shared the story of Ray Stevenson doing that. So it all goes in a circular fashion back to what we're looking at. But yeah, I would say as far as like the movie goes, the villains are very, very one note to a comical level. So I would say it would have been a little bit more interesting if they had maybe a little bit more nuance to them than what we got. Obviously, we kind of have like Bheem's love interest, if I really want to even call it that, because I don't really feel like much of anything comes of that. But she's like kind of the one okay person that we meet that's British. Everyone else is just over the top, constantly beating the shit out of everybody, pulling whips out of their asses, like killing random people and being mad over like spending, 2.5 pounds or whatever the spiel is. It's just comical how villainous they are.
I mean, I mean, over the course of the movie, I kind of felt like there's a bit of a propaganda angle to it. Of
course.
I'm like, they're really, really going out of their way to show the British are assholes. I get, I get that the British did horrible things in India, but I mean, this is just taking it to a whole nother level. I'm sorry, I'm not defending British colonialism by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm sure you're not defending it either. But at the same time, it's like you could do with some subtlety,
Sure. And I mean, we see that all the time, right? I mean, like, anytime like we look at American cinema, like we have movies like Red Dawn, that, deal with the encroachment of people invading. We have all the movies that came out dealing with the Middle East, post, 9/11 and everything. Like, there's just so much of that type of stuff that happens, that, it just, I kind of just go with it because I understand, it's one of those things that I think is going to be. But I totally do agree with you that subtlety would be nice so they don't feel like kind of like almost jokingly bad with how they are. Because, like, I do want them to die. Like, I definitely want that to happen. But I probably would have wanted them to die a little bit more if I saw a little bit more out of them, because they're just so jokingly bad. It's like, okay, they were always doomed to die because they were just such terrible people.
I mean, they're basically the red shirt guys,
Yes, yeah. In essence, yes. So
let me ask you this: were there any particular scenes that stood out to you that made you want to pull your hair out and just say, "What the fuck is going on here"?
Um, I think the only scene, there really wasn't anything. Like, it's one of those things where I think when you go into the mindset that you're going to see something ridiculous, it's okay, right? Obviously, like the escape sequence where Raju is on Beam's shoulders is totally ridiculous, but I think it's just so much fun. It doesn't bother me at all. I think maybe the only scene that it kind of dipped a little bit into that was where like Beam has all the animals come out. I thought that was probably the only sequence that's just a little bit too weird for me, just because like obviously, animals are pretty mindless as far as everything goes. So I know that there's kind of a little bit more of a reason that Beam would have some level of like, kind of connection with the animals and everything. But I think that was probably the only sequence that while it was super cool, it just was a little bit too odd. Like it just was a little bit maybe a little bit too much that they're kind of going into that realm of it's hard to really believe it.
Kind of like
But
that.
that was the only one I thought of. Was there?
It's kind of like the whole Aquaman thing. Like all of a sudden, he just knows how to talk to animals and control them. You know?
Yeah, sure. It's some aspect of that, yes. Or just like even like all the animals just like kind of going out there, and I'm sure some of these animals would do that, but I'm sure there's plenty of animals that would probably be running away and trying to find a way out.
Yeah.
Didn't see too many instances of animals trying to flock away from the situation. They always seem to just be attacking some other British person. So
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that was the one thing that stuck out to me. Was there a scene that you were thinking of in particular?
I mean, the one scene that I thought was a bit on the nose was it was in the jungle, and you had all these British soldiers fanning out, and there was this one guy, and you probably know the guy I'm talking about. He's just wearing a suit, and everybody else is just like wearing wearing army uniforms, and I'm just like, really? They're gonna send you, some random bureaucrat, out into the jungle to go hunt for these two guys who could probably rip your ass, with a single snap. I'm like, what the hell are you thinking? And not to mention, and not to not to beat a dead horse, but I also felt like the British were kind of dressed up eerily similar to the Germans from World War One, because their helmets kind of look like those, the pickle horn helmets with the spikes sticking out. Like,
Yes.
like I saw some of those British soldiers wear that. I'm like, they clearly can't make up their mind if they want to be British or German here. Like, just if you're British, then dress like a British soldier. Don't all of a sudden just start trying out different looks and saying if a pickle horn looks good on you, because it just does. But I don't know. I just thought that one particular scene, it wasn't too big of a deal, but it kind of made me scratch my head and make me wonder. Well, they could have done it a little bit better. And further on, they're like, oh yeah, reinforcements are coming in. They're the special forces, and they're just basically the soldiers just covered in leaves. I'm like, that's your
Yes.
special forces right there. I mean, geez, hey, I'll just stick some leaves down my shirt now. I'm special forces now. Like, come on, like you can't expect me to believe that.
No, I agree. I think it would have been more interesting if like the special forces people actually felt like they had any type of impact on it, because both of them are just so strong and seem to be so good. It would have been cool if like the special forces were people that maybe like when they try to fight them, like they actually punch them and it hurt or something. Like you don't have to.
That's what I was
know,
thinking too.
make-
Or they were Indians also, like they were Indians who were like trained, in the
Yes.
British Army. Like that's what I was expecting, but no, it was just a bunch of guys on motorcycles and with leaves down their shirt, and I'm like, I'm supposed to be scared of these guys? Like, no, I'm sorry. But
I agree. It would have been. I think if we saw them be a little bit more vulnerable, like on a physical level, I do feel like that would have created a little bit more tension. But everyone felt like fodder no matter what.
yeah, exactly. Um, so I do want to go ahead and wrap this up, just because it's getting pretty late. What's your overall score for this movie?
So I would give this. I would probably give this like a 4.3 out of 5. I really like this. This was a ton of fun from beginning to end. I just think that, it sets it up really well. Like, we just see these really, really awesome characters that, are just total badasses. Like, you have to 100% suspend your disbelief. If you're not interested in like realistic things or anything like that, then, it's clearly not going to work for you. But if you're able just to go into it as like, hey, I'm just interested in watching something to be fun. But it was just totally tons of fun. Like, I love seeing the interaction with the characters. Their friendship was just so strong. I love the storytelling and, how they both had to kind of hide parts of themselves from the reality. And then when they both kind of realized like, hey, we're in this kind of together, like them kind of having that bond where Beam rescues him, it was such a good feeling because it's like, good, I'm glad that they're back, because we as an audience know it's kind of trending that way, but them as characters don't know that yet. So being able to finally see that get back together, and it kind of leads up to, obviously, in typical Bollywood fashion, a totally over-the-top fight sequence at the end where, throws the bike in there and, everything blows up and they kill the wife, and then they got Ray Stevenson all kind of sitting there, and he gets shot, and it just ends really well. So I think from beginning to end, really, really enjoyed that. It was a ton of fun. 4.3 out of 5. Would definitely suggest that as long as I said, you could turn your brain off and just enjoy the movie for being over the top for what it is.
Yeah. I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5, and I gotta say the two protagonists, Beam and Raju, they definitely got me hooked. Like, I genuinely enjoyed watching their bromance go through the highs and lows, and the fact that at the end of the day, in spite of the fact that they found it difficult to trust each other at the beginning, they found a way to overcome that mistrust and actually trust each other, and they came out for the better of it. I did think that the villains were one-dimensional, but again, to your point, it's not meant to be like a very serious movie. It's just a fun romp. It's kind of like with Dungeons and Dragons, that movie we reviewed a few months ago. As someone who's seen a few other Bollywood movies, I feel like this is the kind of movie that that you can watch if you just want to enjoy yourself. But it's not really one of those movies that's gonna like take you through the emotional roller coaster like you would with other movies from that area of the world. I do want to give props to Ray Stevenson because I thought he did a phenomenal job given what he had. I did get the feeling that it was a bit too much of a propaganda, but again, that's the direction that they wanted to take it in. So we'll go with that. But overall, I definitely enjoyed it, and I thought given what they presented, it was well worth it. My only other gripe is the fact that maybe they could have trimmed it down to maybe 2.5 hours instead of 3, but that's just me.
Sure, there's a little bit of fat that maybe we could have trimmed for sure. So
yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's gonna do it for our for the Movie Pope podcast today. If you enjoyed RRR or any other Bollywood movies, let us know in the comments below. And as always, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. Take it easy.